Hello and welcome back. In the last session, I talked about the various topics and the subtopics that would be covered in our sessions, in our interactions. And in the same line of thought, let's today start with certain basic terms. Now, the relevance of these terms is in the fact that one comes across these terms on a day-to-day basis in the newspaper or through the various other mediums. Now, the meaning of these terms, the correct meaning of these terms, understanding them becomes important to know the complete picture in a proper context. It is in this regard I have come out with this presentation on certain basic terms that are encountered by everyone on a day-to-day basis. So let's start, and the first term that I have to discuss is the Constitution itself. Now, what is a constitution? What is constitution? See, constitution is essentially the fundamental law of the land. It is the most basic law of the land. Now, what is meant by fundamental law or the basic law? It means that all the other laws that are prevalent in the country, in the society, in the polity, have to subscribe, have to conform to the most basic law or the fundamental law, which is the Constitution. It means that all the rules, regulations, traditions, customs, bylaws, so on and so forth, all the things which are having the propensity to being followed as a law have to conform to the Constitution. Giving you an example, let's talk about rules and regulations. In India, the civil service examination is conducted under the terms of the Civil Service Examination Conduct Rules. Now, these rules have to be in line with, have to conform to the Constitution. Likewise, traditions and customs. Traditions and customs also have to conform to the Constitution. Any tradition or custom which is going against the tenet of the Constitution would be done away with. The classic example in this regard would be the controversy with respect to the Shani Shignapur temple. The Shani Shignapur temple issue, where the tradition or the custom was that females would not be allowed to have proximity with the ruling deity. Now, this was challenged in the courts, in the judiciary, and ultimately the judiciary said that such a tradition or custom was not in conformity with the Constitution and has to be done away with. So that is the meaning of fundamental law. Another term that becomes important within this is organic law. Constitution should be organic in nature. Organic here means that the Constitution should display or should show the signs of evolution. So organic means evolution. The Constitution should change according to the changing circumstances. And if a constitution does not do so, if a constitution does not display this characteristic of being evolutionary in nature, then the constitution ultimately will become obsolete. It will not be able to provide the answers of the contemporary questions. So what is the basic purpose of Constitution? What does the Constitution do apart from being the most basic law or the fundamental law of the land? So Constitution basically defines the rules of the game. The rules of the game here means it defines the rules of interaction. It defines the rules of interaction between the government and the society. how government and society will interact with one another, that is decided, that is defined by the constitution. Likewise, how will the society, the members of the society will conduct themselves, how will they interact with each other, it is also decided and defined by the constitution. So constitution essentially defines the interaction, how interaction will take place amongst each other. Now, what can be the types of constitutions? Essentially, there are only two types of constitutions. One is the written constitution and the other is the unwritten constitution. Written constitution is a codified constitution. It is in a format of a book. It would be codified, and the classic example would be India, or for that matter USA. American Constitution is also a written constitution. Again, it is a codified constitution. The other type of constitution would be the unwritten constitution, where each and every law, each and every legislation passed by the legislature would become part and parcel of the constitution, meaning thereby the constitution is not codified. The constitution is the sum total of all the rules and regulations, all the laws that have been passed by the legislature. And the classic example in this regard is United Kingdom, where the constitution is in unwritten format. Now a question can be asked that which institution would be supreme in a system which is defined or governed by a written constitution, and which institution would be supreme in a system defined or governed by unwritten constitution. So in a country or in a system where written constitution is prevalent, it is the constitution which is supreme. So in India, or for that matter in USA, it is the constitution which is having supremacy. Whereas in a country which is having unwritten constitution, it would be the law making body, that is the legislature, which would be having the supreme position. So this is in a nutshell about constitution, the first term. Now let's move on to the next term, that is the state. The state. Now what is meant by state? By this term, I do not mean to say that I am referring to state of Madhya Pradesh or state of Uttar Pradesh or state of Punjab for that matter. By state here I am trying to say something about authority / power. Now when I talk or define state in terms of authority or power, it becomes very much apparent that I am talking about something which is of political nature, which is something of political nature. So it is important to bear in mind, to keep in mind, that state is essentially a political concept. Now the nuances of state have been studied, have been analyzed in great detail under the political science, under the subject political science. But at the same time, it is very difficult to find a single definition which is subscribed to, or which is respected by every other political science theorist. So there is no unanimity among the views with respect to the definition of the term state. But then again, there are certain conditions, there are certain characteristics on which there is an element of unanimity, meaning thereby a geographic entity should be subscribing to certain characteristics before designating it as state, and those characteristics are mentioned over here. So a geographic entity which satisfies the following conditions would be referred to as state. The following conditions are that geographic entity should be having a territory, that territory should be bounded, meaning thereby there should be a boundary. Within that bounded territory there should be a population living. then that population should be having a government, and that government should be having sovereignty. So these are the 5 characteristics which are required. These are the 5 conditions which are required to be satisfied by any geographic entity to designate it as state. Now let's take the example of, say, for India. Now India in 2020, as we are sitting in, is a state. Why? Because India is having a territory, India is having a boundary, there is a population living, there is a government, and that government is having sovereignty. Now if we go 100 years back, that is in 1920, and then if we would have asked an Indian that whether India is a state or not, then the answer would have been no. Why? Because although India in 1920 was having a territory, was having a boundary, was having a population, was having a government, but at the same time the government was not having sovereignty. Reason being that the government was constituted by the British and was in a way controlled by the crown. But the situation changed when we became independent, when we had our own constitution and government of India. In true sense, an Indian government of India came into picture and sovereignty came into picture. So the entire difference is in a way coming because of this word sovereignty, which I would be covering presently, but for the time being, state means certain characteristics, and those characteristics are territory, boundary, population, government, and sovereignty. State is something of political nature. It is a concept which is more political, and at the same time differentiation should be made with another term, nation. Now moving on to this word nation, and then trying to understand what is the subtle difference between these two words. In the colloquial terms, people sometimes use nation and state as synonyms. They consider them to be interchangeable, but in essentiality they are not. Nation is somewhat different as a concept in comparison to the previous concept, that is the state. Nation is more to do with cultural connotations. It is having much more cultural connotations rather than political. What does it mean? In simple terms, state is a political concept, but nation is a cultural concept. Before moving any further, it becomes important, therefore, to understand that what is the meaning of culture. What does this term entails? Culture includes all those ideas, all those things which gets transferred from one generation to another, things that are passed on, things that are passed on from one generation to another. Now, what can be the examples of the things, of the ideas that are passed on from one generation to another? The basic thing that comes to my mind is language. Now, language is something which is part and parcel of culture. Now, we had learned the language, our mother language, our mother tongue, by observing our parents, and the successive generations would be learning the language, the mother tongue, from us. So this is one thing which gets transferred from one generation to another. Now this is just one example of the things that are included within culture. There are many various other things. Fooding habits, dressing, the dressing sense, etc., etc. There are various things that can be included within the broad heading of culture. Now, this being said, then when will a state become a nation? What would be that thing? What would be that conditionality which should be satisfied before designating a state as nation? A state would be called as nation if the citizens of the land share the same cultural identity. Meaning thereby, if we consider culture to include language, food and dressing, then all the people, when the citizens of if we take the case of India, then if in that case all the citizens of India should be subscribing to one language, one type of fooding habit and one type of dressing sense. If we consider that culture include only these three things, 1, 2 and 3, only these three things, that is language, food and dressing, if this is the case, then it means that state of India is a nation, because the citizens of the land share the same cultural identity. But that is not the case in India. India is a state but nation in making. India is a state but nation in making. And why that is the case, why India is a nation in making? Because we are having variety and diversity. There are many languages. Take out a currency note from your wallet and look at the number of languages that have been included, that have been written on it. You will come to know that what is the variety and diversity in terms of language. Fooding habits are also not uniform. Fooding habits are different. Cuisines are different, so on and so forth. Dressing sense, you are all aware of it, that what are all the dressing sense that are prevalent. Meaning thereby, India is a state but nation in making. Why? Because citizens of the land do not share the same cultural identity. For India in this respect, the phrase which is widely used is mosaic culture. Now, mosaic culture comes from the term mosaic. Now, what is the meaning of the term mosaic? Mosaic essentially is a way to lay the floors. It is a pattern of laying the floors while constructing the houses, in which what happens that on the floor, on the wet cement, pieces of say red marble, black stone, etc., etc., would be placed, where all these pieces of stone represent the variety. They are able to preserve and conserve their individual identity, but at the same time they are bound by this boundary of the floor pattern, and that is called as mosaic. And that is why this reference has been made with respect to India, where we say that Indian culture is a mosaic culture. Why? Because there is variety and diversity, but at the same time the diversity and variety is bound by the idea of India. On the other hand, if we take the case of America or France, now here in America or France, the phrase used is melting pot culture. What is the meaning of the term melting pot culture? If we take the case of America, in America, whatever may be the area of your origin in the world, whether you are from India, whether you are from China, whether you are from Japan, whether you are from Australia, whether you are from any country of the world, any part of the world, the moment you come to America, you land there, you become American. That is why the phrase that comes into picture, Indian American, Japanese American, African American, so on and so forth. So all the people share the same cultural identity, and therefore the idea called as the melting pot culture. I hope this the differentiation between the terms state and nation have become clear, and in the future please don't try to mix the two words and don't try to consider them as synonyms, because essentially they are not. Now moving on to the next term, that is sovereignty. Sovereignty. Now where we have seen this term, we have seen these terms just a few moments back when we were discussing the term state. And one of the 5 characteristics of state was sovereignty, whether the government was having sovereignty or not. In plain terms, in simple terms, sovereignty means free will, whether the government is having the free will to take decisions, whether the government is able to take decisions without influence or not. That is a plain and simple meaning. But if we go a bit deeper, if we try to dig a bit deeper, then the other tenets of sovereignty will come into picture in addition to the idea of free will. And therefore the philosophy, the sovereignty, tells that who is the real power holder, because one who is able to hold the real power would be able to take decisions. So who is the real power holder, from whom the power flows? And if this is the case, sovereignty will tell that what is the source of all governmental authority and power. Please remember, when I was discussing state, when we have discussed state, I said that state means authority and power. Now authority and power coming from where? Authority and power, what is the source? This is question is being answered in the term sovereignty. So what is the source of all governmental authority and power? So whatever may be the sovereign power, that sovereign power will provide legitimacy to the exercise of official power, obviously. Now what all can be the sources? They can be the people of the country, like that is the case in India, or it can be the crown. It can be the crown in a monarchy, like in the case of UK. So these two are the sources. Either it can be the people of the country, as is the case with India, or it can be the crown, as is the case in UK. So whatever may be the source of legitimate power, whatever may be the source, ultimately it translates into the fact that how the government is taking decisions, whether the government is taking decisions on its own free will, or whether the government is getting influenced in some way or the other. Apart from this, sovereignty also means that the government is supreme, in the sense that it does not get influenced by foreign influences, and at the same time does not get swayed by unnecessary or illegal domestic pressures. And here what I'm trying to say, I'm trying to take into account the Maoist insurgency. As an example, I'm trying to quote Naxalism and Maoism over here. Government of India considers Naxalite problem as one of the major problems. And why it is being considered as a major problem? Because Naxalism as a philosophy is trying to challenge the sovereign power of the people of the country, and in that sense it is trying to challenge the sovereign government of the country. So that is the meaning of the term sovereignty. It is all about who holds the real power, who holds the real authority, what is the source of all governmental authority. Now it can be the people of the country, as is the case with India, or it can be crown in a monarchy. Now let's come to the next term, that is socialism. Now if you go through the text of the preamble, it includes the word socialist. It includes this term socialist. Now what is this term socialist, and is it related to socialism somehow? We have to say this. See, the term socialism, this term socialism was coined by Henry de Saint-Simon, a French academician, philosopher. But the most famous proponent, most famous persons associated with this philosophy have been Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, both German philosophers. These have been the most famous one, but the term has been coined by Henry de Saint-Simon. Now what is socialism? In plain and simple terms, socialism wants that the state should be the controlling authority over the means of production. The state should control the means of production. And why it wants the state control over means of production? Reason being simple, that socialism demands a classless society where there is no distinction between the propertied class, that is the bourgeois, and the labor class, that is the proletariat. It wants to have a classless society where there is no class distinction. Now what is meant by this idea? What will be achieved through the state control over means of production? Essentially, state control over means of production means that there should be no private property. And if private property is not there, then the distinction between haves and have-nots will not be there. If private property is not present, then the distinction between haves and have-nots will not be there. Now who are haves? Haves are those people who are having private property and therefore having a control over means of production. And who are have-nots? Obviously those who are not having the private property and therefore are not controlling the means of production. Ultimately, what will happen when state control will come into picture? Private property is gone, therefore haves and have-nots will come on the same level. There would be no class distinction. There would be no class distinction, and therefore everybody would be on the same level, and therefore classless society would be achieved. Two classes, that is haves and have-nots, and classless society when everybody is on the same level. So this classless society would be achieved. Now how to get to this objective, how to achieve this target? And the philosophy of socialism says that introduce rapid changes in the society to achieve the goals of a classless society. Go for rapid changes. Go for rapid changes so that the aim of classless society is achieved. Now, as I said earlier, that our constitution also includes the term socialist. In the preamble there is this term socialist, and we have just understood what is the meaning of socialism. So does it mean that in the Indian constitution the presence of the word socialist and the explanation of the term socialism how to reconcile these two ideas, because if you observe, in India there is presence of private property, whereas the explanation of the term socialism says that there should be no private property, there should be a classless society. So these two ideas are conflicting. So what is the correct picture? What is the situation, correct situation, true situation? Please understand that Indian Constitution does not subscribe to this type of socialism that we have just understood, sometimes called as the doctriner socialism. This type of socialism is not subscribed to by the Indian Constitution. So what is the type of socialism? What is that brand of socialism, version of socialism, which is subscribed by the Constitution of India? And that is the next term, that is Fabian Socialism. It is this version of socialism which is subscribed to by the Indian Constitution. What is this Fabian? Fabian comes from the name of the Roman general Quintus Fabius Maximus. Now, this Roman general Quintus Fabius Maximus was very famous for a style of warfare that he had developed, and that was the war of iteration. War of iteration involves a strategy which is very much gradual and slow in its pace, and therefore the aim of this type of warfare is to wear down the enemy forces to such an extent that it becomes easy to overpower them. So ultimately, this philosophy calls for a gradual change in the society rather than a rapid change. What would be the utility, therefore, of gradual change? What would be the best part about gradual change? Before going into that, let's try to understand what is the nature of change. Change of any kind is always turbulent. Change of any kind will always bring turbulence. Try to recall what happened when demonetization was announced. What was demonetization essentially? Demonetization was all about making changes in the currency system by making a declaration that 500 and 1000 rupee notes were not to be considered as legal tenders, meaning thereby 500 and 1000 rupee notes were declared as illegal. Now this was a big change in the economy. And what was the result of that change? What was the result of that declaration? There were long queues in front of the banks, and this itself shows the level of turbulence that was witnessed by the society. So that is the point that I'm trying to make, is that change is always turbulent. Now the doctriner socialism that we have just seen previously wants rapid change. Change should be rapid. Demonetization in itself is a classic example of a rapid change, and what happened because of that rapid change, it was a big turbulent situation came into picture. Now in that scenario, it might happen that the change may backfire. You may not be able to get the support which you were expecting because of that rapid change. Another example, or I would say hypothetical example of a rapid change would be that already the new date for the examination has been declared, for the civil service examination has been declared. And if it so happens that say today the government says that we are preponing the examination will happen on the last working day of the month of July. Now, what would be the result of such a rapid change? It would be, this change would not be going down well with the candidates, and it will backfire. So rapid change always is problematic. There are bright chances of backfiring of that change. It is in this context Quintus Fabius Maximus said that go for gradual changes. Gradual changes, make the changes in such a manner, make the changes, bring changes, introduce changes in such a manner and at such a pace, at such a speed that it could be assimilated, it could be incorporated by the society. Make changes gradually, make changes slowly, so that it becomes assimilated in an easy fashion by the society. So that is the basic idea of Fabian socialism. Essentially, it also wants the expansion of socialist philosophy. And what is that expansion of socialist philosophy? What is that socialist philosophy? It also wants a classless society. But the process of bringing about a classless society, the stages involved, the steps taken should be such, and they should be brought and taken up at such a speed that the society is able to assimilate those changes, is able to incorporate those changes, and therefore the chances of the change going into a backfire is minimized. So the Indian Constitution, please understand, subscribes to this version or this brand of socialism rather than doctriner socialism that we have just seen previously. An important point to note, and this is an important statement also, you can incorporate this while writing your answers, that the Constitution wants to realize an egalitarian social order where everyone has an equality of opportunity. The Constitution wants the realization of an egalitarian social order, where everyone would be having an equality of opportunity, meaning thereby the state would be giving everyone a fair chance to make their lives better. That is the meaning of the word socialist that we find in our constitution, in the preamble to our constitution, and that word socialist refers to Fabian socialism rather than doctriner socialism. Now let's move on to the next term, the next word, which is somewhat related to these ideas, and it is communism. Please understand that communism is a more detailed analysis, it is a more enhanced version of socialism, it is a more detailed version, more detailed analysis of socialism. Why I'm saying that it is a more detailed version? This is because of the simple fact that socialism as a philosophy wants to achieve the goal of a classless society, and the way they are suggesting, that is being suggested, is to bring or to introduce rapid changes in the society. But there is no further elaboration. The elaboration in a way comes through communism. Communism essentially talks about two goals and suggests a way to achieve these goals. Now these two goals are the dictatorship of the proletariat, and finally the emergence of a classless society. So if we compare the philosophy of socialism with that of philosophy of communism, then obviously one will be able to observe that the final goal or the ultimate aim is same, that is the emergence of a classless society. But then again there is this preceding stage, or you can say a preliminary stage before the emergence of a classless society, and that is what is called as dictatorship of proletariat. Now these are the two goals, and what is the way suggested? The way suggested is revolution. Now what is meant by dictatorship of proletariat? What is meant by this dictatorship of proletariat? Let's start with the situation which is having or which is allowing private property, and then what will happen? Class distinction will emerge. A would be having the property, therefore would be the have or would be having a control over means of production, and B is the have not, is not having the control over means of production. Now what will happen? That revolution will come into picture, and after revolution or because of revolution, a reversal of this situation will come into picture. A reversal or an inverse relationship will come into picture, and that inverse relationship would be looking something like this, where B, who was the have not, will come at the top, and A, who was the have, would now be coming at the bottom, and that is something which is called as dictatorship of proletariat, meaning thereby people who were oppressed, now they would be at the helm of the things, and A, that is the oppressor, will now have to listen to B. And ultimately what will happen? That the final goal will come into picture, and that is the emergence of a class-less society. Both A and B would now be standing on the same plane, and therefore would be on the same level, and therefore a emergence of classless society will become a reality. Now what is the way suggested? It is revolution. Now revolution can be a violent revolution, revolution can be a peaceful revolution also. So the way in which revolution is realized changes the nature of the philosophy itself. Now if the revolution is a violent revolution, as is the case with Maoism, now this Maoism Mao stands or comes from Mao Zedong, one of the prominent faces at one point of time of the Communist Party of China, where he used to say that power flows through the barrel of the gun, meaning thereby, in other words, he's trying to say that a revolution comes through the barrel of the gun, violence, and therefore the idea becomes Maoism. Revolution can also be a peaceful revolution. In that way also this ultimate aim of classless society can come into picture. So these three terms, that is socialism, communism, and Fabian socialism, that we have discussed, and ultimately it can be said that it is Fabian socialism that the Constitution of India subscribes to. Coming to the next term, that is secularism. Another important term which is mentioned in the preamble to the Constitution, another important term in the sense that it appears every now and then in the news. So what is the meaning of secularism? Please understand that secularism is having its genesis, is having its birth in the Western world. This concept is not an Indian concept, essentially it is a Western concept. And what does it say? It totally divorces statecraft and theology. Statecraft means the way in which the state functions. We have just seen what is the meaning of the term state. State means authority, state means government, state means sovereignty, state means sovereign power. So how does the state function? That is the idea of statecraft. What is the meaning of theology? Theology means religious philosophy, the philosophy of the religion. What secularism wants, that state if I can denote state by letter S and religion by letter R, then there should be a complete divorce between state and religion. State should not interfere into religion, and religion should not interfere into state functioning. That is the idea of secularism. The philosophy says that the state will not be having a religion of its own. If the state is not having a religion of its own, then one of the basic conditions of secularism is satisfied. Now, if you look at the name of the full name of the country Pakistan, the official name of the country Pakistan, the official name is Islamic Republic of Pakistan. Now the usage of the term Islam or Islamic shows that Pakistan as a state is having the state religion as Islam. Whereas if you compare it with India, and if you are having a passport, and if you look at the cover of the passport, the name of the country is mentioned over there, and it says Republic of India. Now one country is having a religion associated or religion present in its official name, and in the other there is no such thing. So what does it show? That Pakistan is not a secular country, whereas India is a secular country. Taking the discussion forward, what will secular principle lead to? Secular principle will lead to a situation where the state will conserve all religions, but will not be partial to any religion. Obviously, in a secular country there will be no state religion. That would be the next thing. If we talk with respect to India, in context of India, then India has evolved a more positive meaning of secularism in comparison to the Western countries. Because in the Western countries, the idea is complete divorce between state and religion. There should be a complete divorce between state and religion. This is in the Western world. Whereas in India, the situation is a bit different. What has happened in India is that there would not be a complete divorce between state and religion. State will maintain effective contact with every religion, but at the same time the state would be equidistant from all the religions. Or for that matter, state would be equidistant from the followers of all the religions. So mathematically, if I can draw it, it would be something like this. If S represents state, FR1 represents the followers of religion 1, likewise FR2 represents followers of religion R2, FR3 followers of religion R3, and FR4 religions or followers of religion R4. Now state would be maintaining effective contact with the followers of every religion, but at the same time the state would be equidistant from everyone. I hope you understand the relevance of these equal to signs placed over the line. Mathematically, it means the length of the line is equal. So what I want to display over here, that state will be remaining equidistant from all the religions, but at the same time maintaining effective contact with every religion. So much so that the state will also be taking care of those individuals who are having no religion. State will also be taking care of all those people who do not follow any religion. NR means no religion, followers of no religion. I'm talking about atheists and agnostics. So what does it show? That for state, in the case of India, religion is a personal matter, and the public policy will not be taking into account the religious considerations of an individual. That is the meaning of secularism that is being explained over here. Coming on to the next term, a very simple one, that is democracy. The notion of democracy, democratic principle. What does it mean? The philosophy says that all the people should be allowed to take part in the process of making their destiny. That is the basic idea of democracy, that people should be allowed to take part in the process of making of their destiny, meaning thereby they should be allowed to become the part and parcel of the decision making process. Now democracy can take two forms. It can be practiced in two ways. One, it can be direct, the other it can be representative. It can be either direct democracy, where everyone takes part in the decision making process in their individual capacity, that is direct democracy, and the other way it can be representative democracy, where people do not directly take part in the decision making process. People elect their representatives, and those representatives would be taking part in the decision making process on behalf of those people who are the electorate or who have elected those representatives. See, India has opted for representative democracy in the form of parliamentary form of government. What India has opted for representative democracy in the form of parliamentary form of government. India has opted for representative democracy in the form of parliamentary form of government, where we elect our representatives. Please remember that in any election, parliamentary election or state legislature elections, we elect our representatives, and some of the representatives, they constitute the government. But at the same time, this becomes important. This point is important, can be asked, and it has been asked many a times in the examination, that there is one institution which is the embodiment of direct democracy in India, and that is Gram Sabha. Embodiment of direct democracy in the sense that elections are not required to be contested. An individual is not required to contest elections to become the member of Gram Sabha. If the individual is above 18 years, and if the individual is the voter of that area, the individual becomes the member of Gram Sabha. Now, as I said, this question has been asked in the examination. So what does the examiner do? He or she try to confuse the candidate by putting Gram Sabha as one of the options, and the next option would be Gram Panchayat. Two more options would be there, and the candidate, the student would be in a bit of hurry and would not be focusing on Gram Sabha and would not be opting for it, and would be choosing Gram Panchayat, and what happens, the answer becomes wrong. So please keep in mind that it is Gram Sabha which is referred to as the embodiment of direct democracy, not Gram Panchayat. I hope the term democracy is clear. Now next, let's move on to the next term, that is federation. In a country like ours, many chief ministers, they talk about the type of functioning of the central government while criticizing the style of functioning of the central government, and one of the points that they always include is that the federal setup is getting eroded, the federal fabric is coming under stress. Now what do they mean by federal fabric or federal setup? The answer lies in the explanation of the term federation. Federation essentially is a system of governing where you are having governments at two levels. Governments would be at two levels. One government at one level would be the central government or the central level that we say, and the other would be at the state level. So if we take the case of India, then the government of India is the central government, if I can use the letters CNG for central government, and the various state governments, say the state of Punjab, the government of Punjab, government of UP, government of MP, so on and so forth, they are the state, they are at the state level. Now, one of the important characteristic of a federal system is that both the governments, whether it is the central government or whether it is the state government, if SG would be representing state government, both the governments would be having their designated zones of competence. They would be having their designated areas in which they can work. In the case of India, this has been done through the 7th schedule, the 7th schedule of the Constitution. The 7th schedule of the Constitution does this designation of zone of competence. There are certain things which are coming under the union list, which are the prerogative of the central level. Likewise, there are certain things which is something called a state list, which is the prerogative of the state level. So what we see in federal system, we see that in federal system there would be duplication of work. Work would be getting replicated, work would be getting duplicated. This is one of the basic tenets of a federal system, because we are having governments at two levels. Obviously there would be an element of overlap, there would be an element of duplication also. So what is meant by duplication? What can be the example in this regard? Simplest example, at Government of India level, there is something called as Ministry of Home, the Ministry of Home Affairs. Likewise, in the state governments, there is this Department of Home. I hope you are able to see that there is duplication. Likewise, at the Government of India level, there is this Ministry of Human Resource Development dealing with education and such other things. At the state government also, what we see that there is Department of Education. At the Government of India level, at the central government level, there is something called a CPWD, Central Public Works Department. At the state government level, at the state government also, there is PWD, Public Works Department. So what is happening over here? There is an element of duplication. So two things should be kept in mind when trying to analyze federation. Whenever there is a case in front of you of a country and you have to decode to decide whether there is federation or not, first step in the decoding process would be that you have to see that whether there are governments at two levels or not. That is the central level, that is the central government, and the second state level or the state government. This is the first thing. Second that you have to see is that whether there is designated zones of competence for both of the levels or not. First thing, I repeat, is that you have to see whether there are two levels of government or not, and second, whether there is designated zone of competence for both the levels or not. If these two conditions are satisfied, then what will happen? Well, you can say that yes, that particular country is having federal setup. Now, what is the opposite of federal government? The opposite of federal government is a unitary government. What will be therefore the characteristics of a unitary government? First and foremost, there would be government at only one level, and secondly, when there is no other level, there is nothing called as designated zone of competence will not be there. Government at one level, single government would be there, and there would be no designated zone of competence. Each and everything would be the responsibility of that one government, that is central government, and the other authorities would be the mere extension of the central authority. Now, what are the examples of a federal system? Classic examples: India, USA. Regarding USA, it should be noted that it is the oldest federation. So much so, the federal model is essentially coming from the American system. The other example is our country, India. The example of a unitary system is UK. Now, what can be the reason for USA or India to have a federal system? Could they not have gone for a unitary system? Or for that matter, what is the reason for UK to have gone for a federal system while they have opted for unitary system? A commonsensical explanation in this regard would be the size of the country itself. The size of the country. Look at the size of America, or for that matter, look at the size of India. India is the 7th largest country area-wise. USA is much bigger, much larger in comparison to that of India. Obviously, size of the country would be one such consideration to have governments at 2 levels. Look at the size of UK. UK is a small country, and if a country is small, then going for or opting for federal system where you are having governments at 2 levels with designated zones of competence, which will lead to duplication of work. Essentially, it is a wastage of resources. Apart from this, there are certain other you can say criterias, or you can say certain other factors that have to be taken into account. As and when we will be coming to those points, I'll be taking those things into picture. So this presentation was all about the various terms that you encounter while reading the newspapers, and these terms have to be understood in a proper context, so that you are able to get the complete picture while reading the newspapers. With this, I will conclude this session, and I would like you all to please go through this presentation, and when we'll meet next, we'll take the things forward. Until then, thank you very much.